evening, everyone. I am, again, pleased to be here, and I am enjoying each and every one of these caucuses of African American leaders that are held every month here at the Wiley Bates Center. I've learned so much about the history of the Wiley Bates High School and how it was a prominent high school in Anne Arundel County for many, many years. And I have met wonderful people here, including the owner of the Lemongrass Restaurant, who was so gracious, and he says, yes, if you want to put your sign up in my yard, yes, you can. Thank you. I share with you, for the most part, because I really think Pastor Ricky Nelson Jones has done volumes in terms of explaining why there is a need to run. But I'd like to also share with you, credential-wise, I have been an administrative law judge for over 10 years. What you don't see in the papers, I'd like to share with you. I have over 40 published opinions. We, as administrative law judges, are subject to performance evaluations. I have received the top performance evaluations. But in addition to that, again, as Reverend Jones has explained to you, the process has been exclusionary in many instances. So the point here is to make certain that, again, someone takes a stand and decides to run in this election. So we have boldly taken the stand and say, yes, there should be diversity on the bench, and there is a need to diversity because diversity is the order of the day. And yes, Reverend Jones is right. There are no Asian Americans on the bench. There are no Indian Americans on the bench. There are no Hispanics on the bench. There are no. So this is a large, wide-set issue and problem that you, the electorate, can change. Now, the last point I want to make is that when I attended last week a South Democratic County Club meeting in which I was invited to, one of the speakers brought to our attention that over 150,000 registered voters that were Democrat stayed home in the last gubernatorial. That's too many. So my point here is to encourage everyone. If you have the opportunity to go to my Facebook page and share it with people, that's a good idea. Even if you support a specific presidential candidate, the point is to go out and get out the vote in the community. If it's a senior citizen home, if it's helping people get to the polls, it is necessary. It is mandatory because every vote counts. It is not the time to stay home and to bypass the electorate process. Number one, the state has made it very easy for everyone to exercise their right to vote. This early voting period is wonderful. It means you don't have to stand in a long line on election day on April 26th. You have April 14 through April 21 to go to 5 specific regional centers to cast your vote, and you're done. So we hope that everyone here will definitely not sit down and pass the word on to those who you think might be interested in voting and are bypassing the electorate process. Energize them, mobilize them, encourage them to get out and vote. Thank you.
We have one other candidate that's running for the 4th Congressional District. We want Christopher to come up and give us a few words. We're limiting it to no more than 3 to 5 minutes.
Hey, good evening, everybody. How y'all doing? Well, I am retired Colonel Warren Christopher, and I am seeking to be your servant leader in Congress. You all, I'll just tell you, the reason I'm doing this is because, no disrespect to anybody else, but every cycle we go to the polls and vote. We vote with the same circle of people. We get the same results, and then we wonder why we stay stagnant. Frankly, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of the same rhetoric, the same results, and we wonder why there is, the lack of, support for judges, or we wonder why there's a lack of support for veterans or senior citizens, or why someone hasn't dealt with the rising cost of education, or why the recidivism rate You know, in a state like Maryland is so high. When are we going to be sick and tired of being sick and tired? You all know my background, and I didn't just start showing up at the Caucus of African American Leaders during election season. I've been here with you for years. I've been right here, not expecting anything but to be educated and to learn and to get to know you. And so I'm simply seeking to serve you, and I understand what that service is all about because I've done it for 24 years on the battlefield and in my home, raising my 2 daughters as a single dad. I've done it as an executive in government, as the chief of staff at the Department of the Interior, overseeing business enterprise for the federal government. And I've also done it in the United States Senate on Capitol Hill, working for very prominent legislators on the Veteran Affairs Committee, on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and on the Small Business Committee. My agenda is simple: to make sure that our veterans have a champion, to make sure that our seniors have a fighter that's going to make sure that they get the prescription drugs at a cost that is similar to the cost that we get in the VA, that they are protected from predatory lending and gimmicks, that there is legislation to deal with rent control and across the country. My agenda is simple when it comes to returning citizens. You do the crime, you do the time, but you shouldn't have to pay for the rest of your life. It is simple. I make no apologies about being a bold and unapologetic leader for our minority-owned small businesses. That is for Black people, for Latinos, and for veterans, to make sure that we have access to prime government contracts and capital. I thank you all so very much for considering me and keeping me in your prayers. I truly am seeking to serve you in Congress. Thank you so much.
There is a gentleman I just want to acknowledge because his service made a difference for all of us in this room. When Dr. King and others marched and participated in the early 60s, they were people who, quite honestly, were nondescript. The names of people you would never hear. We're fortunate tonight to have a gentleman that was with the Selma March. He was there when they tried to cross the bridge in Selma, Alabama, and where the forces of the state tried to prevent him from voting. Phil, would you stand up and let's acknowledge Phil, one of the richest people from Selma, Alabama, to make a difference. Now, why do I say that? Why I lift them up? Martin Luther King Jr. said the greatest march that an American can make in a democracy is the march to the ballot box. It's the one march that every American ought to participate in. And we want to make sure that this time around, that the 150,000 plus people who did not participate in the last gubernatorial election, that doesn't happen again. We want to be able to energize, organize, and mobilize people. Sarah's going to come up and share with us her plan to help us get people out, to make sure that people know where to vote. Sarah, why don't you come up? Let's give her a round of applause.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Elfreth. I'm president of the District 30 Democratic Club, and I want to recognize 2 folks in the back. Mike Miller, who's a former board member of the D30 Club. And Mark Rodriguez, who's also in the back, is a member of our board as well. I think we're all very excited about the primary on April 26th. Mike and I have been working on an issue called Stop the Madness, and so many of you came to our event last month. We had about 150 people come, the majority of whom volunteered for campaigns for Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, for folks running in the 4th Congressional District, in the Senate, and it was great to mobilize Annapolis around this issue, around this urgency, to not kind of let this crisis go to waste. We were all struck by the moment, and then we started thinking about, well, this is a moment, but we need to make it into a movement. The D30 Club is very passionate about getting people to the polls. We heard from Judge Barber that 150,000 people stayed home in the 2014 election. Between the 2009 municipal election in the city of Annapolis and 2013 election, over 770 Democrats stayed home and did not vote. And I think we've all seen the results of that with with our current mayor here in Annapolis. It's D30's mission to elect Democrats, and we need to do that not just every election year. We need to go and talk to voters throughout, so that we're not asking them for their vote, but we're talking to them about the issues that they care about. We've picked 3 precincts in the city of Annapolis that are low performing. They have about a 13% voter turnout, and we want to go talk to those voters 6 times over the next 3 years. So we started last weekend in the snow. A few people, crazy people, dedicated people came out with us in the snow and knocked on dozens of doors and talked to dozens of voters, asking them what they care about, issues like education or the environment, crime. And we got very positive feedback and so many people that are committing to vote on April 26th or during early voting. We're going to go out again this weekend and then next weekend, and then we're going to go out in October before the general election, and then again in the 2017 primary, 2017 general, 2018 primary, 2018 general, to create consistency, to make sure that the Democratic Party is out there on the doors, not asking people for their vote, just asking them to vote. So that is our plan. I have a few pieces of literature here. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for giving me some time. Mayor Cohen lost by 59 votes. Speaker Bush came in second to Delegate McMillan by 190 votes. We plan on talking to 1,800 voters over the next 3 weeks. If we can convince 10% of those voters to come out, that's 180 votes, and that's an election. So that's our goal.
Maryland General Assembly and what happened there is a great example of what it means to be able to elect people to office who make a difference. Speaker Bush and members of the Democratic Party, that was around the party lines, voted to give felons an opportunity to vote. So people who previously could not vote in the state of Maryland, who had a felony, now can vote. Yesterday at an event, we had a gentleman stand up and eloquently talk about what it meant to be a felon and not to be able to get a job and get a second chance. And those Democrats who voted to override Governor Hogan's veto have now people who could never vote before to vote. We had also in the Maryland General Assembly, and you'll hear a little bit more about this when we get to it, we had a process that created for the first time in the history of Anne Arundel County, for the first time in 40 years, a situation where no African American was on the Board of Education in Anne Arundel County. First time that happened in 40 years. And Democrats said that was not right. And so they passed legislation to create a system that would first have NAACP and CASA and other minority groups be on a nominating commission so that they too would have an opportunity to have input in who would become a school board member. The governor vetoed that bill. Democrats overrode the veto in the House and the Senate, and now we will have a process that will allow people the opportunity to ensure that diversity is on the school board. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because, again, citizens exercise their right to vote. Is anybody here not a registered voter? I presume everybody's a registered voter, right? There are candidates that spoke this evening. And I noted that many people applauded for those candidates. But beyond the applause, they need your help. They've distributed literature, they've got flyers, they've got yard signs, and they need volunteers. If you've heard a candidate, we're going to have enough time for this to happen. When we break up and go into more of a social event, take the opportunity to go up to the candidate or candidates that you like and ask this one question: how can I help? And I can assure you that every candidate will have something that you could do to volunteer. So again, let's give a round of applause to all of the candidates. Now now this is where the rubber meets the road. One of the things that the Caucus of African American leaders attempt to do is pool our resources as a community together. We attempt to put pressure on the government to make the government be more responsive to the people it serves. So a little over 4 or 5 months ago, we had the county executive from Anne Arundel County come in, and he said to the audience that was present that he wanted to see there to be an increase in the number of women, Latinos, and African Americans to serve on the fire department. And he got a huge applause for that because, again, clearly diversity is something. If you happen to be a Latino or you're living in a household where English is not your native language and your house goes on fire and nobody can speak English, it would be helpful to have someone who's bilingual to be there. And the county executive said he got that. And as a result of some work by some Democrats, Barbara Mikulski and Ben Cotton, this county was given a $7 million grant for the purpose of hiring people. $7 million, a county executive that says that he really wants people to serve on the fire department. The fire department that has 813 persons, currently only 12 Latinos, and about 44 African Americans. The last class they had, no women was in the academy, period. So we've had people who've applied because that's what they say they wanted and entered the academy or would like to get into the academy, and they've been turned down. And I want to ask Brother Quentin to stand for a second. College educated, 22 years old, business person, passed everything, all of the results. And what he received was a form letter that said, tell us what the form letter said.
Even though that I completed every step of the process, I was not among the candidates that would be selected to enter the academy.
Y'all hear that? You might have to say it a little louder. I don't think they heard you.
Even though I was successful upon completing every process of the academy, or every step of the process, I was not among the candidates that would be selected to enter the academy.
And that's it, no other excuse.
No reason.
Do you know what your grade was? Because they have a Pascal system. Do you know what your grade was?
On which
Test?
on the written test, no, I don't.
But he passed every level. And then he gets this letter. No explanation given. And there are other people, by the way, that's in the room who've had a similar experience. Now, we can just kind of ignore that, or we can demand that the system be more accountable. So in June of this year, we have the county executive come back because he made some commitments and promises, what he wanted to do in terms of diversity. So at our June meeting, he will be here and have to respond to people in terms of what's going on. This problem is not isolated to the fire department. We've got problems with the police department, which you'll hear about a little later, both at the county and at the city level. And the one thing that I think everyone will agree is that everybody ought to be treated the same. Right? It should be the same strokes for the same folks. But folks who pay attention know that's not what's going on. I want to share just for a moment a personal experience, one that you had to be in the courtroom to see. Some of you read about, of course, the lawsuit that we brought against John Leopold, who's a former county executive. Some of you may be aware that what he was doing was using his police officers for partisan purposes and collecting dossiers on people. What you probably don't know is that his claim was that a corporal was overzealous and did it all on his own. Just went out and started collecting these files on people and doing all kinds of things that shouldn't happen. And the judge just didn't believe his story and found him liable for what he was doing. it's very, very important that we know who we're electing to public office, because the consequences can be tremendous. Now, without creating a nightmare situation, just think of this for 1 second. Suppose on November 6th, is that the election day? Is it November 6th this year? The first Tuesday of November, whatever that is. It's now 11 p.m. at night, and they just announced the new president of the United States will be Donald Trump. Before people say it can't happen, it can't. Because unless we have people who are engaged and involved, and I need not tell you where I think we would go as a nation if he became president, quite honestly. So I'm stressing the need for people to get involved. When we break up to the social, please go up to the candidates of your choice and ask that question. What can I do to help? One day, when a man asked Malcolm X, a reporter asked Malcolm X, what are you going to do about the racial problems in America? Malcolm X gave a classical answer, and it was more than you are. We want you to do more than the average person would do. We're going to bring about this change. At the Napa City Council, something happened last night that I want to underscore. And I think it's because what's happening nationally with Trump. I've never seen this happen at a public meeting. A speaker got up and was giving his view, his point of view. The place was packed full of people. And that speaker, who had indicated that he had a water bill from the city of Annapolis for $320, his water bill was sent over to the county government, and they put his home up to be sold as a tax lien. And he just wanted to know why they were doing this. Were they singling him out? It's a water bill, it's $320. Why are you sending my property up to be sold? And the mayor called him, what, Kenny? A liar. Never heard that before. To tell a citizen that they're lying, publicly say it. And it's that kind of behavior, when people begin to do that, they think they've gotten to a point that they be disrespectful. And the one thing about the ballot box, it's a great equalizer. It's the one thing that every American has the right to exercise. It's the one thing that can make a difference. Now, before I go into the specific thing on the Annapolis City Council, I want to share one moment with you. It's a proud moment. It's one of those moments that I wish more and more people understood. All of us have been knowing about young people, many of them African American, who've been shot by law enforcement officials. When Trayvon Martin was shot and killed, George Zimmerman was acquitted. But there have been other shootings all over the country where prosecutors have decided not to prosecute. It happened in a place in Ohio with a young boy named Trammell Rice, 12 years old, shot and killed. The community was very, very angry because the prosecutor decided that he would not indict anyone for that killing. And some women in that town did something that I think should be applauded all over the country. A group of women who had lost sons through violence decided they would knock on every single door in that county. And they had one message and one message only. If you really want to honor the memory of Trammell Rice, go out and vote against the prosecutor who refused to indict the police officer. And he lost.
Yes.
An incumbent. They heard that in Cleveland, and they did the same thing in Chicago. Lost. And it goes to show again the power of the vote if we collectively will get involved. Has Sergeant Spearman arrived yet? We'll wait for him. Okay. Will Rao, just about to get something to eat, is going to give you a quick update as it relates to the police department and what happened at the city council. There's a group of black officers who filed a complaint alleging that there were victims of discrimination, that there is systemic discrimination going on in the Annapolis Police Department. William, it's yours. Tell us real quickly an update.
As long as you change, put some blood in some other parts of the body.
You need to elevate your
My
voice.
name is William. I think I know most of you all. I'm just going to give a few updates about some things that have been happening in the past, I guess, since we last met. And some of you all weren't here last time, just to give you a little rundown. As Carl referenced last night, yesterday, the plan was for us to gather a bunch of residents of Annapolis. I say residents because even as I look in this room now, we've had that conversation. A lot of the conversations about voting, a lot of the conversations about going out and spreading information to people. But what we have to remember is when we had those conversations, we're talking about people, populations of people that a lot of times don't have the privilege and don't have the knowledge to orient people, right? And so subject matter sometimes doesn't reach those people who probably, in my personal experience, need this information. Not more, but just as much, right? So when we talk about a lot of the subject matter, we have to remember that sometimes it's left in the vacuum, because we're having these conversations about really, one could argue whether it's totally interesting to everyone, but they're definitely extremely pertinent and relevant matters when we talk about our community, because we're here, I hope we're all here representing aspects of our community. So I wanted to preface it with that, because what we did yesterday, we determined that we need to do a lot of research in the communities. And when we say communities, of course, we're specifically talking about communities of color. When we say communities of color, that includes the Latino population as well as African American population. What we do know about the city of Annapolis is disproportionately, that means black people, right? That means a population of young African Americans and just a large concentration of people who have lived in Annapolis their entire lives. And I asked the question, how many of you all lived in Annapolis your whole life? Like, didn't leave? Okay? Look around. Now, there's a large percentage of people who live in Annapolis that have lived in Annapolis and not moved their entire lives. Do you all know that? An extremely large population. Do you know that? There's a lot of young people that are in their 30s. Some people I knew when I was growing up before I moved away that still live where they live. Okay, so when we talk about a lot of our conversations are around systemic issues like racism, which is overarching, right? Because racism trickles down to economics, geography, where people live, all of those things. When we talk about law enforcement, all those things play into it. So it's just kind of a reminder. So we did some outreach. We went to Newtown 20, to Harbor House, Eastport Terrace, Bayward's Garden, Robinwood, Bywaters, right? So what we did is we went to all these different communities. Now, mind you, that's not where all black people live in Annapolis, right? We do know that, right? But what was illustrated is that a lot of these issues that we're talking about they're not resonating aside from a lot of the conversations that we had. So I'm challenging you all when we talk about privilege. It's not gender-based always. It's not always based on race. A lot of times it's economic, and it's having information, having the opportunity to arrive somewhere. So hopefully next time we have these meetings, and next time we have anything that involves anything that's a larger issue aside from this room, we engage with our community members and engage with people understanding that it's a futuristic action, because we can talk about education education, we can talk about law enforcement, we can talk about all of those things. But if the very people who are most affected by those things don't even know that, like they don't even acknowledge that it's an issue. We had conversations with people about very simple things, like police. And it was just, there was just not a connect there. And that's disheartening for me because we've been putting a lot of work into that. And so, it may not be like a popular conversation, but it was on my heart to just share that a lot of these conversations that we're having are excellent and meaningful and incredibly powerful conversations. But with anything, even if you think critical thinking, like A plus B equals C, right? And logic model thinking, you can't go from identifying a problem that we identify here, right? And then the actual aspect of it that's the touch point or the catalyst for what that is, we skip over and go to policymakers or go amongst each other. So we have to remember that our goal should be to bring in people that this is an unorthodox, strange environment for them to be in. Because learning and change only takes place by that working together, right? It's not going to happen. Like, one person cannot free another person. That person has to willfully walk into freedom. We can show them towards freedom, but everybody has to be touched personally and brought to somewhere else so they can learn and get education. So we finish with that. I felt like I did a sermon this morning. But I hope you all hear what I'm saying. That's a huge part of what's going on tonight. That's a huge part of what we're doing. Is we have to engage and include those people in these conversations. And first and foremost, we have to allow them to actually frame the conversation. Unless we're talking about some things that we're intimately involved with, that involve our lifestyles. But if we're talking about things like poverty, the education gap, and we don't have children, we don't have parents of children that are actively involved in that process, it'll make our conversations a lot richer. I just want to say that. And that's not to knock anything we're talking about, because we're bringing it. I think the next part of what we need to do is always, it's like each one teach one, and then also we bring some others along with us so that we can further this conversation. So the last part of this, in terms of the recommendation, very simply what we did is, as Carl said, we went and drafted a series of recommendations that were called from a city hall meeting, recognizing that there was a gap between what the Annapolis Police Department, the city of Annapolis, those legislators and policymakers, and the communities and the people who are affected by what they do. There was a serious gap there. So we developed a series of recommendations presented to them. They had conversations about them. We had private meetings with them. They were behind the door in public meetings, and they kind of strung us along a little bit. And then the proposed budget was put out, and it didn't include a lot of those things that we know as Annapolitans lend themselves to that change from an identified problem, like when you talk about heroin. We hear all these busts about heroin and crimes and drug and youth issues, but then there's nothing in the budget that illustrates any preventive measures. There's nothing around training, nothing around additional education, nothing around jobs. So we went with them with that, and the police department came back with, to their credit, they came back with a report that answered the recommendations. And essentially, out of all of the things, and they itemized a few things and referenced a few things, but out of all of them, what they came out with most publicly was the fact that they agreed with the use of body cams, which is kind of a win, because it allows for greater accountability. Then there's other parts that are connected with that. The last piece is, I keep saying the last piece. So, are you all familiar with the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights? Yeah. Are you all familiar with that? It's a pretty heavy thing. If you haven't, look it up and kind of research it, because it encompasses a lot of police reform pushback, right? Because the Bill of Rights for them allows and gives them a kind of a grace period, amongst other things. But what we found in one of our recommendations for a civilian review board, the excuse that the police chief gave us for why a civilian review board was not feasible or possible in Athens was it because of the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights? But what we do know is that's not the case. It isn't the case. And they can say that because there's this, it's nothing against police officers, but it creates a barrier, it creates a set of like due process things for police officers, right? It gives them this opportunity to collude, which means I go and, something comes apart, and a police officer has the opportunity to get a certain amount of time to get their story straight or whatever. I mean, it's not that negative. And what that does is it stops an aspect of unbiased justice taking place, right? It stops that process for people who are not embedded to come to a decision and really look at the evidence. It also illustrates that a lot of times the departmental investigation ends up being the only investigation, which sounds like at home, your parents, you know what I mean? So one of the other things is housing.
Fifth last.
Okay. Well, you told me to go through all the things. This is all informational stuff. Hopefully, housing authority. I'll skip this. So one of the things also that we touched on was last night was we had Robert Hayes who spoke. I don't know if Robert's still here right now. I just wanted to acknowledge them. Lacey, Kenny's sister Lacey, spoke very strongly about some issues. Carl spoke on racism. And we had a young man who's not here now, Deontay, who's a part of this movement called Black Wall Street. Some young guys that are talking about one of those prongs, and one of those prongs is the financial part of it, right? About commerce and understanding how important business is. And at the end of the day, my daughter told me this in the car. She's like, none of that stuff really matters. What you do is you go get your money, and then you show up and tell them how you need for it to be done, which I thought was interesting because that touches in on that piece of if you don't have financial viability, when you don't have a bank account, you're not managing it. It's very hard to get people that are the ones who are writing those checks to bend over backwards to give you something that ultimately might stop them from getting that check. And then Veronica was not here, but Veronica did a lot of outreach. She's new to the fold, and she's an example of that kind of fresh new blood for us that allows us to touch again those younger people and the populations of people that may not be privy to these kind of conversations. You know what I mean? So,
Thank you very much. Let's give a round. I've been receiving constant emails, you've been receiving constant calls, and the reason is there's been an incident that occurred. Unfortunately, we have somebody from the Board of Education that can describe the incident and what the school system is doing. The kind of emails I'm getting, is very, very disconcerting. But Austin, who is with the Arundel County Board of Education, is going to tell us about the incident, and then I'd like you to make a formal announcement regarding your situation that was mentioned. Please come forward, and he will tell you so you can get it firsthand as opposed to different things that are appearing on Facebook, what happened at North County High School.
Say the name again, please.
Well, my name is Anthony Alston. I'm the Executive Director of Equity, Accelerated Student Achievement. Thank you for having me here tonight. So it was brought to my attention Monday morning, a situation that occurred at North County High School. So a teacher assigned an assignment. It was an AP literature class, and in that class, they were reading a text from Jonathan Swift, which is dated back to the 1950s. And in that, they were asked to read and discuss in their groups his writing of A Modest Proposal, the name of the literature that they were reading. Students were then asked to create their own modest proposal. And one of the students wrote a modest proposal. And in that proposal, he discussed his desire to eliminate African Americans from the United States. Eliminate African Americans from the United States. He then took a picture of his assignment and tweeted it. So I was made aware of this on Monday morning. The tweet has been removed. A letter has gone out, and I sent a copy of the letter to Mr. Stone as well as Mickey Emanuel, who is the co-chair of the Equity Advisor, as well as Mr. Rufford to the left. There are a group of us that are looking there tomorrow morning to speak with the African American students in the school, as well as Safe and Orderly has been involved to investigate the students' action, as well as investigating the teachers' action. Because as we look at the assignment and the parameters that were given, it was not very clear for students as to the expectations. So that also is a pending investigation. So that's the situation that's going on.
Could you describe how the student suggested to eliminate African Americans? Tell us how, I think people need to get a sense of why so many parents are now calling. Absolutely concerned.
Absolutely. So in that letter, he talks about African Americans being, in his words, Negroes being a blemish to society. Talks about returning Negroes back to Africa, the western portion of Africa, as they were brought from slavery, and then bonded that area to demolish. And then in that letter, in his homework assignment, he also mentions how the impact that Negroes have on America, talking about the increased number of single-parent households. He discussed in his response the amount of poverty, low-income housing, low-income wages. Talked about pan-stacking and cruelty. So it was a rather explicit assignment that he responded to.
Now, to put this in context, the very first day of public schools in Anne Arundel County, August 24th was the date. First day of school, there was an incident that involved the blackboard, where some racist material was put on the blackboard. And at the time, a full investigation was supposed to be done by the police department, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to make it clear, they announced on New Year's Eve that the investigation had concluded, that the state's attorney felt there was nothing could be done to prosecute the individuals. They knew who the individuals were. End of story. So you have this complaint. One of the persons here is a parent. They were never notified. A lot of criticism, a lot of controversy, right? So now we get an incident where a young man, it's academic freedom, right? He may have the right to express themselves. But where do you draw the line? And what will be the school system's response? Now we hear that in this situation, they're going to meet with the African American students tomorrow at North County, because the word is spreading very, very rapidly. And this is where leadership comes, in my humble opinion, can play a huge factor. You can either exacerbate the situation, or you can make it a teachable moment. And when we in Anne Arundel went with the experience last year, when school first opened, many of us criticized the way that process was handled. In another school district, Howard County, they had an incident. And the way Howard County handled that incident, many people, myself included, applauded. Because they wanted to make sure that these young students who had made these racist comments in a school district understood why that was a problem. They had no sense of history. They didn't know why certain terms were derogatory. But in Howard County, the superintendent made it a point that not only that school, but every school in that district was told why that was not the thing to do, and was used as a teachable moment. Leadership is very important. And those of us who are parents and grandparents who have children going to school will have to judge whether or not the leadership that's being applied, in this case, whether they're doing the appropriate thing or not. And you'll be reading about this. Obviously, there are people already talking to the media. There are calls coming in from parents who are very upset. So my recommendation would be for Anthony to give some consideration to take him back to the school system, to look at the model that Howard County used. It became a very successful model. They realized that even though the incident took place at a school, students don't just talk to people at the school there, they talk to people throughout the system. Now, as a result of a lot of things occurring, one of the things I wanted to share with you, we get in a position where people get appointed to or get elected to important offices. And once they get that position, there's a great expectation that they will benefit the community as a whole. Today, it hasn't been publicly announced yet in the paper, but it will be. Anthony Austin, the young man you just seen stand up, the superintendent is recommended to become the new deputy superintendent. So he's put in a leadership position, and it's that leadership position that makes all the difference in the world. There are two things that I'd like to say, and then we move to the final part of this program. When people get elevated or elected to public office, there's a great expectation. When President Obama got elected to public office, people expected things to change. He's the President of the United States of America. And if you look honestly at his record, there are some things that have changed. When people get elected to public office, people expect those who get elected or appointed to make a huge difference. We don't want to see history keep repeating itself over and over again. So when people get elected to office, we want to be able to see the difference. And there's a man named Harold Washington, who was the mayor of Chicago, first African-American mayor. One of the campaigns I went to Chicago to work for in 1983. And Harold Washington, upon winning the election, and by the way, in Chicago, they have it in February, which is very cold in Chicago, and it was designed for the purpose of suppressing African-American votes. That's true history. And it was not an accident that they had it. But Harold Washington won. And when he won the election, he came out to this crowd of people. They were applauding and going crazy because he was the first African-American to win. And Harold Washington said to the audience after he got him quiet, "I want to apologize to you in advance." And people were wondering, what is this man talking about? What has he done? And what he was referring to, in Chicago, there's a sign that says, "We apologize for the inconvenience." And what that sign means is that in your neighborhood, or in that neighborhood, there's construction going on. Sidewalks are being repaired. Work is being done on the infrastructure. And in Chicago, that never happened on the South Side with African Americans. Poor people never saw sidewalks being repaired, never saw things that we take for granted, street lights working. And when he became the mayor of Chicago, he kept his promise. And poor people on the South Side of Chicago, for the first time, saw that their vote made a difference. That he promised that he was going to put up street lights, and he was going to fix the sidewalks, and he's going to address the rodent problem in Chicago, and he did. And in 1987, when he ran for re-election, the numbers were incredible. People coming out because he made promises and he kept promises. And that's what politics ought to be ultimately, what improving people's quality of life. And that's what happened in Chicago. The second point I want to make to you, which I've said before, there are two types of insects. There is a bumblebee and there's a hornet. And with a bumblebee, I grew up on a farm, a place called Davidsonville, Maryland. With the bumblebee, there could be 50 to 100 bumblebees in an environment. And you could literally go to each bumblebee and kill it, one at a time. And none of the other bumblebees would do anything. The bumblebee is larger than a hornet. But if you went toward a hornet's nest and you touch one of those hornets, they would swarm. They would operate as a unit, as a community. They would make a difference. And I say that because I want to make this point very clearly. In our community, we've got to be like hornets. We've got to make sure that people respect our vote and our power. And people who don't respect that, they have to pay a price. When it comes to bears, as big as bears are, even bears won't mess with hornets, but they know what they are capable of doing. And so we're trying to organize the community. Last night, in Annapolis, something happened that I really want people to understand. It's disgraceful. Jason, can you stand up and come up for a second? Jason Thomas has been a police officer for 13 years. 16 years. Is the sergeant still with us, or did he have to leave? Sergeant, he's sparing. Would you ask him to come in for a second? Remember the analogy I made about bumblebees, because I'm going to show you how it relates in a second. While we're waiting for him, how many kids do you have? 3. Married?
Yes, sir.
And you want to add happily?
Happily married.
Just in case your wife catches it. Sergeant, would you come up? 16 years in law enforcement. I think I did it right. Correct me if I got it wrong. 30 years. Sergeant Randy Williams, would you come forward? Make sure I keep this right now. Sergeant Randy Williams, Sergeant Spearman Officer Thomas works at the Annapolis Police Department. Sergeant Randy Williams works for the Baltimore County Police Department. You served almost 20? 20 years or something? 20 years. Now I want to ask somebody just to use common sense for a second. Each of these men have brought a complaint of discrimination against their respective agency. Let me try to make sure people understand this clearly. In 30 years, you can retire, right? Yes, sir. You could easily retire and just walk away, right? And all of the problems would no longer be with you. But you decided to fight, right?
Yes.
You filed a complaint. Officer Thomas, that we pay police officers money to protect us, got injured in the line of duty. And being injured in the line of duty, there's no dispute he was injured in the line of duty. Affects his ability to be able to run and do all these kind of things. The Annapolis Police Department, and by extension, the Annapolis City government, did something it's never done before. I'm a native anthropologist. I've been around a long time. I've never heard of a situation where a police officer who gets injured in a line of duty is denied his disability. This is what happened to him. This is what I want everybody to hear good. Alderman Kenny Kirby, could you come forward, please? Just want to show this leadership. By the way, we got some tall men in this room. You get on that side. Get on that side. All of them, Kenny Kirby was in a meeting with city officials. I want you to hear this. And we talked about a case dealing with Officer Thomas. Injured, line of duty, and all that we want, we said, was to treat him like you would treat any other police officer who's been injured. Tom Andrews, who's the city manager, told us the following, that if a body determined that he was eligible for his disability, they wouldn't fight him, there would be no problem. So he goes through this process, and they determine hypertension.
Yes, sir.
And the hypertension that this body, independent body, looked at, said is a direct result of you doing your police work.
Yes, sir.
Right? So I thought it was all over with. We met with Tom Andrews, we met with the political powers that be, and they told us, a group of us, that if somebody, the independent group, who's not biased one way or the other, would look at the facts, whatever they came up with, they would go along with. When they declared that you had hypertension and it was job related, what did the city make sense?
They appealed the workman's comp decision of the hypertension part, but I injured my left knee, which also restricts me from doing my duties as a police officer. So they are fighting everything that I'm entitled to left and right.
There was some of you will know him. Unfortunately, he's deceased. There was a detective named Shelley White who worked on the Annapolis Police Department for 19 years. He served in the military. He was well-liked. And he too believed that he was the victim of discrimination. He was one of the plaintiffs, along with Sergeant Spearman, that filed a complaint. He died before that case was adjudicated. 19 years in serving as a police officer, served his country in the armed services, and the Annapolis city government. The mayor didn't attend his funeral. The mayor and the police chief didn't send an honor guard. Just what you would do in any case, show your appreciation for service. It's important that we as a community and we as voters understand that there's certain kinds of behaviors we just can't tolerate. Just can't tolerate it. Sergeant Williams, Baltimore County Police Department, 20 years, followed suit, went through similar issues in his department. There's a brother here who was a member of the fire department. He just got terminated. We as a community must say enough is enough. We as a community must be able to organize around these men. Kenny Kirby is one of the more effective members of the city council. Comes to all of the meetings. He's here. He loans his voice and support to these causes. But no one person can do it alone. So the purpose of the caucus is to come together when we run into people who have issues like these men and ask, what can we do to assist? Now, there are three things I'm going to ask everybody in the room to do. Just three. And to use Malcolm X's quote, what will you do more than you? Please be one of these ones in the room and follow through. Just three simple questions, three simple things we need you to do. Everybody got a pen? I know you didn't come expecting homework. And if writing's not your forte, that's okay. Somebody who wrote help you. First, would you join me in giving them a round of applause for their service? And I can tell you, police officers, this is not typical for police officers. They normally just go along with it. Get your 20 years, get your 30 years, and you're gone. They're not fighting this for themselves. This is for those who will follow them. This is for those who will make sure that the path is easy. I'm going to digress for 1 second. And George, you will appreciate this. George Collins is a firefighter as well. With a history for people. Jackie Robinson, who everyone knows, was the first African-American baseball player to break the color barrier. We all know that, right? Jackie Robinson's wife is still living today. Her name is Rachel. Do you know that Jackie Robinson, those of you can look at a photograph, will see that his hair is milk white. Jackie Robinson, being the first, was required to do some things that no human being should be required to do. Jackie Robinson, if he made it to the base or hit a home run, he was told by the owner of the team, the Dodgers, don't smile, don't give anybody any reason to believe that you're sticking it to him. And she writes this wonderful book about her husband. And what most people don't know about Jackie Robinson is that when he would come home, after going through all of this craziness, couldn't tip the head. With his own teammates, he had to eat in a separate facility, stay in a separate hotel. His own teammates. But he went through all of that and endured. And he developed hypertension, later high blood pressure. And his wife would talk about him coming home and literally just crying. There was nothing he felt that could be done. By the way, this year is 1947, for those who are historians, and it's a world that many of us never experienced. But those who were the pathfinders paid a great price for it. So here's the 3 assignments. If you can write, you can either send an email or you can write this. It's a simple letter to the Capital newspaper. The man's name is Sergeant James Spearman, and the officer naming this Jason Thomas. Voters, informed people can do things. First, thanking them for their service and calling on the city to find a way to resolve these complaints without going through protracted litigation. People doing it. Just that one simple letter going to the Capitol. 1, let the powers be known that there are people who know what's going on with these young men. And 2, that they're concerned. So on issue number 1, has anybody got any difficulty with that? Anybody need any help with it?
Would you spell the names?
Yeah. Spearman or Thomas?
Spearman.
Spearman. S-P-E-A-R-M-A-N.
Experiment.
Like spear and man.
First name.
First name. James. Title Sergeant. Jason, now you can spell Jason more than one way, so spell Jason.
Jason is Jason. Thomas, Thomas.
Just a little peacefully. 30-year veteran, or not veteran, but 30 years of service, 16 years of service. Just a little peace on it. Now, for those who cannot write, because some people just don't write, don't email, not into computers, pick up a telephone. If you live in Annapolis, the number is 410-263-7997. And you just want to leave a message. That's all. 410-263-7997.
That's the capital.
No. It's to the mayor's office. Early in this conversation, said that the mayor of the city told a citizen, you're a liar. Publicly said that. But all I want you to do is just call his office and just simply say that we expect the mayor to not call people liars and to treat all citizens fairly. Robert Eves is the one he called a liar, but it doesn't make any difference who it was. A mayor ought not to be calling a citizen a liar. It's just not the way the mayor's office ought to operate. 410-263-7997. Now the third thing.
And ask to go into his voicemail. If you don't get him on the line, the woman who's gonna pick up the phone is a total incompetent. Being honest, that's not nice either, but I'm just telling you. I can identify myself and can't get to the right people.
What is the
So
gentleman's
that's a
name?
problem.
What is the gentleman's name?
He's not gonna get your message across.
EADES.
Yeah,
EADES. Clinton, this man right here. President Pierre, can you come in for a second?
What is the E's first name?
Robert. The two young men that you see coming up here are people who are, one was a firefighter and one wanted to be a firefighter. And George, they had run into a system that washed them out. Brother Clinton passed everything, and didn't have men. Right? Brother McNair was in, and they washed them out. What I want you to pay attention to is who are they? Men.
Qualified man.
This ought not to be happening in 2016. It ought not to be happening in 2016. And only as a community rallying together can we make a difference. And the third and final thing, and Sarah, you don't love this, but it really is a difference. The third and final thing is, who we elect to public office really do make a difference. There ought to be somebody that one could call up who would be responsive to a community call, who wouldn't ignore people and say, well, they don't vote anyway. We don't have to be responsive to them. We've got to change the way people are treated by the way we behave. And by us collectively encouraging our family, our friends, and people who normally don't vote to vote, we can make a huge difference. So there are three things. Some of you, I hope, will do all three. But if for whatever reason, you only got to select the one thing that you will do, please vote. Casting that ballot makes all the difference in the world. William Clay Sr. said, we have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent enemies. And our interest is to make sure the system is fair. Everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, please, on item 3, cast your ballots, do it early, and get people out to the polls to vote. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Carl, you and I have had this discussion about legal background, legal support, class